Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today, because we have some very exciting General Hospital news to talk about, and it's definitely worth the wait. Lulu had gone to the docks with a feeling she could not explain. The place was wrapped in cold air and silence, the kind of silence that always seemed heavier in Port Charles when something life-changing was about to happen. She had followed a strange message that gave her no comfort and no real answers, only a place and a time. Deep down, she had tried to tell herself there could be a simple reason for it, but the moment she saw the back of the man standing near the water, she knew nothing about this meeting would be simple. There was something familiar in the way he stood, something that touched an old corner of her memory, and yet the distance between recognition and certainty felt painfully wide. As Lulu stepped closer, her heart began to pound harder, not from fear alone, but from the strange pull of a past she had not fully recovered. She had already lost so much time in her life. Since waking up, she had been trying to rebuild herself, piece by piece, memory by memory, relationship by relationship. She had learned to live with the painful truth that time had moved forward while she had been trapped in darkness. So when the man turned and she saw Ethan's face, the shock ran through her like a wave. For one suspended moment, it felt as if the world had offered her a gift at last. Her brother had returned. Her family, broken and scattered for so long, had sent one piece back to her. But that fragile hope cracked almost immediately when she saw the confusion in his eyes. What frightened Lulu was not that Ethan looked tired or distant. It was that he looked at her with the cautious stare of a man facing a stranger. There was no warmth of recognition, no sudden flood of sibling affection, no trace of shared history in his expression. His face carried strain, and his eyes searched hers as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he did not understand. Lulu felt the joy drain from her body and turn into something colder. She had imagined many reasons for Ethan's return, but not this. Not a return without memory. Not a reunion where one heart was rushing forward while the other stood frozen in uncertainty. The pain of that moment was deeper because Ethan had already missed so much. He had not been there when Lulu's life collapsed into silence. He had not stood beside her hospital bed through those lost years. He had not been there when she woke and found a different world waiting for her. Somewhere inside Lulu had probably held on to the quiet hope that when she finally saw Ethan again, that lost time might shrink, even for a little while. Instead, standing in front of him now, she felt that time become even crueler. It had not only separated them, it had come back and stolen the bridge between them. Still, Lulu was not the kind of woman who turned away from pain once it had found her. Beneath the heartbreak, her instincts began to sharpen. Ethan had not returned in peace. That much was obvious. His clothes were worn, his movements were careful, and there was a tension in him that did not belong to an ordinary homecoming. He seemed like a man who had been living in survival mode for a long time. There were shadows on his face that did not come from the gray sky above the docks. Lulu began to realize that Ethan's lost memory was not the whole mystery. It was only the first sign of something much larger and much darker. As she stayed with him, trying not to let her own grief overwhelm the moment, Lulu started noticing the little things. Ethan reacted strangely to certain names. Some details seemed to stir him, not clearly, but like faint flashes across a damaged landscape. He looked troubled whenever Port Charles was mentioned, as though the town carried danger even if he could not remember why. There was also a deeper fear in him, one that suggested he had not simply wandered back into her life by accident. It felt as though he had been pushed toward this place by forces he did not fully understand, as though some unfinished part of his past had dragged him home before his mind could catch up. That was when Lulu's shock began to change shape. Her sorrow remained, but now it stood beside suspicion. Ethan's memory loss did not feel natural. It did not feel like a simple injury or a passing confusion. It felt connected to secrets, to hidden pressure, to a stretch of missing time no one had yet explained. Lulu had spent enough of her life around danger to know when something was wrong beneath the surface. And this was wrong in a way that made her stomach tighten. Ethan had not just forgotten her. Something had happened to him badly enough to break his connection to the people who should have mattered most. The cruelest part was that Lulu could see pieces of the old Ethan still living inside him. There were moments when his expression softened for reasons he could not name. There were brief pauses when he seemed almost pulled toward her by instinct alone. Those tiny cracks in the wall around him made everything sadder because they proved he was still there somewhere. He was not gone. He was buried. Lulu understood that kind of loss better than most people ever could. She knew what it meant to have life stolen, memory bent, an identity left hanging in the distance like a voice you almost recognized but could not reach. So the meeting at the docks became more than a reunion. It became the beginning of a painful search. Lulu would not be able to accept Ethan's condition as a mystery that solved itself. She would want to know where he had been, who had seen him last, what kind of danger he had crossed, and whether someone had deliberately taken his memory from him. The return of her brother, which should have brought comfort, now opened a door to dread. Because if Ethan came back broken, then someone or something had broken him. And in Port Charles, that kind of damage never stays isolated for long. It spreads through families, through loyalties, through old wounds that never truly healed. For Lulu, this moment would not only test her love for Ethan, it would test her strength as a woman who had already clawed her way back from the edge of oblivion. She had awakened into a world that kept asking her to endure loss. And now she was being asked to endure a different kind of loss all over again. Yet this time, she was awake, aware, and determined. The sister Ethan could not remember was still there in full. She could remember enough for both of them. She could hold the history he had lost. She could become the steady hand that guided him back through the darkness, even if the truth waiting at the end of that path was painful. And perhaps that is what really happened here. Ethan did return to Lulu. He did come back into her life. But he returned as a man damaged by something hidden, carrying a silence he could not explain and a past he could not fully claim. That is why he did not remember his sister. Not because the bond was gone, but because something terrible had come between memory and love. And for Lulu, the heartbreak would not simply be that Ethan forgot her. The heartbreak would be realizing that his return was not the end of a family absence. It was the start of a new and dangerous mystery, one that might finally reveal what had been done to him before he found his way back to the docks, back to Port Charles, and back to the sister who refused to give up on him. Ethan's return to Port Charles feels like the kind of event that looks simple on the surface, but carries a much deeper emotional storm underneath. After so much time away, he does not come back to a peaceful town waiting with open arms. He returns to a place full of old ties, unfinished feelings, and dangerous possibilities. That is why so many people inside the story, and so many viewers watching from the outside, immediately sense that his return cannot be only about family. A man does not disappear for so long and then suddenly step back into this world without bringing some kind of shadow with him. Even if he wants a quiet life now, his arrival already feels like the beginning of a secret that will not stay hidden for long. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that Ethan may be connected to Delilah Wilson in a way no one expected. If there is even a chance that he could be the father of her child, then his return becomes far more than a personal comeback. It becomes the start of a life-changing revelation. This kind of twist would fit General Hospital very well because it mixes family shock, emotional responsibility, and the pain of lost time. Ethan has always seemed like a man shaped by movement and uncertainty, someone who keeps going instead of standing still. If he now has to face the idea that he may have left behind a child, then the story gains a powerful emotional center. It would force him to stop running and finally face the kind of responsibility he may never have been ready to carry before. That possibility also becomes even more dramatic if Ethan truly does not remember everything clearly. A missing piece in his memory would make the situation more heartbreaking because the truth would exist before he is emotionally ready to face it. Delilah's place in the story would then become very important. She would not simply be a woman tied to gossip or speculation. She would represent a chapter of Ethan's life that he may have forgotten, buried, or never fully understood. The pain in that kind of storyline comes from the idea that a person can lose years, choices, and emotional bonds without even realizing how much has been taken. For a man already returning in a fragile state, the discovery of a child could either save him by giving him purpose or break him further by showing him how much of life slipped away. At the same time, Ethan's return may be connected to something far more dangerous than personal history. There is a strong dramatic pull in the idea that he has ties to the WSB or that he is being hunted by enemies connected to a larger and darker world. Ethan has never felt like a man built for an ordinary life. There has always been something restless about him, something that suggests he could easily be pulled into trouble bigger than himself. If he comes back carrying secrets from that world, then Port Charles becomes more than a hometown. It becomes a hiding place, a battleground, or perhaps the only place where he can still find people worth protecting. That would explain why his return feels uneasy rather than joyful. A man running from danger does not arrive with peace in his eyes. He arrives with caution, silence, and the sense that every familiar place might still hide a threat. The mention of Jen Sidwell makes the story even more intense because Sidwell represents exactly the kind of enemy who can turn one man's return into a much wider crisis. If Ethan is connected to Sidwell in any way, whether as an enemy, a target, or someone who knows too much, then his presence in Port Charles could put many lives at risk. That possibility would make Ethan more than a returning relative. It would make him a moving piece in a larger war. And that kind of danger would suit General Hospital because the show is at its strongest when personal emotion and outside threat begin to blend together. Ethan would not only be struggling with where he belongs, he would also be struggling with whether his presence is placing the people he loves in danger. That inner conflict could give the character real depth and make his return feel important rather than temporary. Still, there is another direction that may be even more touching because it is so human. Ethan may simply be tired. He may be tired of wandering, tired of unstable roads, tired of never having a real home. Sometimes the most dramatic reason for returning is not revenge, danger, or mystery, but exhaustion of the soul. A man who has spent too much of his life moving from place to place may finally reach a moment when he wants something real. He may want a kitchen, a front door, a routine, and the comfort of waking up in a place that belongs to him. If that is what brings Ethan back, then his story becomes deeply emotional in a quieter way. It becomes the story of a man who has seen enough of the world to realize that peace is more precious than adventure. But because this is Port Charles, even a simple desire for peace is unlikely to remain simple for long.